Hi, everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The silver light of the full moon bathed the forest in an ethereal glow, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to sway to the ancient rhythm of the pack. He marked me under that luminous sky, his teeth a gentle pressure on my neck, a searing warmth blossoming through my veins as his scent, wild and intoxicating, claimed me utterly. "Mine," he whispered, his voice a low growl of possession, his gaze, molten gold, burning into my very soul. Forever. But he didn't know the truth, the dark, agonizing secret that coiled in my gut like a venomous snake, the memory of a moonless night years ago, when I, out of desperation and self-preservation, had been forced to end the life of his sister, a life that haunted my every waking moment. Now, a bond forged by fate burned between us, a dazzling, impossible connection woven through a tapestry of lies. When he learns the devastating truth, will the love in his eyes turn to an unforgiving rage, compelling him to destroy the very mate he has claimed, or will the ancient pull of our bond prove stronger than the deepest betrayal? The forest floor beneath my bare feet was a mosaic of cool earth and fallen leaves, each step a silent testament to the ancient dance of nature. My wolf, a sleek, shadowy presence within me, moved with effortless grace, her senses alive to the myriad scents and sounds of the night. We were on patrol, a routine duty that had become a common ritual in the years since I had found refuge with the Riverbend pack. My name is Lyra, and for 5 years, I had poured every ounce of my being into protecting this territory, into earning the trust of a pack that had, against all odds, offered me sanctuary when my own world crumbled. Tonight, however, was anything but routine. It was the night of the claiming, the final ceremony that would bind our alpha, Rhys, to his chosen mate. The air thrummed with anticipation, a vibrant energy that crackled around the pack, pulling us all into its powerful current. My own heart, usually a steady drum within my chest, beat with an unfamiliar tremor. It wasn't the excitement of the pack, but a potent mix of dread and longing that I barely dared to acknowledge. Rhys. Even his name was a resonant chord in my soul. He was the epitome of an alpha, tall and powerfully built, with eyes that shifted from warm, earthy brown to molten gold when his wolf stirred. His presence commanded respect, yet his leadership was tempered by a deep compassion that drew loyalty from every member of the pack. For months, an undeniable, potent awareness had simmered between us, a magnetic pull that defied logic and twisted my gut into knots of fear. I had fought it, fiercely, desperately, reminding myself of the chasm that lay between us, the insurmountable secret that would inevitably shatter everything. As the moon, a brilliant silver orb, began its majestic ascent, the pack gathered in the ancient clearing, their anticipation a tangible force. The ceremony was simple, rooted in tradition. The alpha would choose his mate, mark her, and speak the vows that would bind them forever. My gaze, against my will, sought out Rhys. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his profile etched against the darkening sky, his eyes already glowing with the golden light of his wolf, a primal hunger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. And then, his eyes met mine. Across the clearing, across the multitude of pack members, his gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. It was a silent conversation, a raw, undeniable recognition that bypassed all reason. The air crackled, The pack's collective energy seemed to surge, and I felt my own wolf stir, a primal yearning that threatened to unravel my carefully constructed defenses. A collective gasp swept through the pack as Rhys began to move. He didn't walk towards the expectant female he had been rumored to choose, a beautiful, gentle beta named Willow. Instead, his golden eyes never leaving mine, he strode directly towards me. Each step was a deliberate, powerful declaration, cutting through the hushed silence of the clearing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. No, I thought, a desperate plea echoing in my mind. This can't be happening. The bond, previously a subtle hum, roared to life, a searing current that threatened to overwhelm me. It was too strong, too consuming, pulling me inexorably towards a destiny I both craved and feared with every fiber of my being. He stopped directly in front of me, his powerful presence enveloping me, eclipsing the world. His scent, wood smoke and wild earth, flooded my senses, intoxicating and dizzying. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. His golden gaze, usually so controlled, was now filled with an raw, elemental longing that mirrored my own. "Mine," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly growl that resonated deep within my chest, making my wolf purr in reluctant acknowledgement. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my neck, sending shivers down my spine. And then, a gentle pressure, the soft nip of his teeth, a mark, a claim, a searing warmth that bloomed outward, binding our very souls. A gasp rippled through the pack, followed by a chorus of awed murmurs. The bond flared, hot and undeniable, igniting every nerve ending, every hidden corner of my being. It was pure primal magic, a connection that transcended thought, weaving our life forces into a single, unbreakable thread. My wolf howled within me, a joyous, triumphant cry that was immediately stifled by the terror that seized my heart. "Forever," he whispered against my skin, his voice thick with emotion, as he pulled back slightly, his golden eyes searching mine. "My Lyra, my mate." I looked into his eyes that held nothing but adoration and fierce possession, and a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. He didn't know. He couldn't know. He had claimed me, the alpha of the Riverbend pack, his sister's killer. The bond, so exquisitely beautiful, was built on a foundation of shifting sand, a deadly secret waiting to shatter everything. The whispers of "forever" echoed in my mind, a poignant irony. How long could forever last when the truth would inevitably tear us apart? The celebration that followed the claiming ceremony was a blur of joyous faces, celebratory howls, and the heady scent of shared pack energy. Rhys, his arm possessively wrapped around my waist, radiated a triumphant joy that was both intoxicating and agonizing to witness. Every pack member approached us, offering congratulations, their eyes wide with awe at the unexpected turn of events. I offered polite smiles, my voice a little hoarse, my mind a tempest of conflicting emotions. The bond, now a vibrant, insistent hum beneath my skin, pulled me closer to Rhys with every passing moment, a physical manifestation of our undeniable connection. It was a warmth I craved, a sense of belonging I had never truly known, yet it was also a constant reminder of the terrible truth that separated us. Later, as the festivities began to wind down, Rhys led me away from the lingering revelry, towards his den, nestled deeper within the heart of the territory. The path was familiar, yet now, walking beside him as his claimed mate, every rustle of leaves, every scent of damp earth, felt charged with new meaning. The full moon, high above, cast our silhouettes long and intertwined, a deceptive image of perfect harmony. Inside his den, the air was warm, filled with the comforting scents of pine and Rhys's unique musky aroma, now inextricably linked with my own. He turned to me, his golden eyes, no longer glowing with the raw intensity of the claiming, but softened with tenderness, sweeping over my face. He reached out, gently tracing the line of my jaw, his touch sending shivers down my spine. "I knew," he murmured, his voice husky, "from the moment I first saw you, Lyra, that there was something about you. A strength, a quiet fire. But I fought it, tried to deny the pull, thinking I had a duty to choose based on Ride. Tradition." He paused, his gaze deepening. "But the moon knows. It wouldn't let me deny what was always meant to be." His words, so earnest, so filled with a genuine love, twisted the knife of guilt deeper in my gut. He believed in fate, in the sacred bond, in the purity of our connection. And I was standing there, a living lie, bound to him by the very magic that should have exposed me. My mind flashed back to that other moonless night, years ago. The primal scream, the desperate struggle, the sickening thud that ended a life. His sister, Arya. The memory, usually a dull ache, flared into a sharp, piercing pain. I forced a small, shaky smile. "Rhys," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "this is overwhelming." He chuckled softly, pulling me closer until my head rested against his chest. The strong beat of his heart a steady rhythm against my ear. "Overwhelming, yes, but glorious too, isn't it?" His fingers tangled in my hair, his scent enveloping me, a comfort that felt undeserved. "We have forever to get used to it, my mate." Forever. The word echoed in the quiet intimacy of the den, a cruel mockery of the finite time I knew we truly had. How could I build a future with him when his past, a brutal chapter I was responsible for, lurked like a predator in the shadows? Every shared glance, every gentle touch, every whisper of affection felt tainted by the secret I carried. It was a suffocating weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The bond, a constant hum of connection, flowed between us, a stark contrast to the churning turmoil within my mind. It amplified his emotions, his joy, his contentedness, and in turn, amplified my guilt. I felt his peace, and I felt the profound injustice of it, knowing the truth would shatter it into a million pieces. I knew I couldn't tell him, not yet, not when the bond was so fresh, so raw, so powerful. The shock, the betrayal, would be too much. But how long could I keep it hidden? How long before a forgotten scent, a casual conversation, a shared memory with another pack member brought the past crashing down around us? The Riverbend pack had a long-standing alliance with the Shadow Peak pack, Rhys's birth pack. Visits, shared patrols, alliances for the annual hunt, these were all common occurrences. The possibility of an encounter, a recognition, was a ticking time bomb. As Rhys held me closer, his breathing deepening in sleep, a fragile peace settled over me. His warmth was a comfort, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing fear. But even in his arms, under the protection of his new claim, I knew that the true battle lay ahead, a battle not against an external threat, but against the crushing weight of a past that refused to stay buried. I was the Alpha's mate, claimed under the moon, bound by an ancient magic, and I was his sister's killer. The paradox was a torment, a silent scream within my soul. The days that followed the claiming ceremony were a dizzying kaleidoscope of new routines and heightened senses. As Rhys's mate, my role within the Riverbend pack shifted dramatically. No longer just a respected warrior, I was now Luna, a figure of authority and guidance. Pack members approached me with deference, seeking advice or simply offering their well wishes. I participated in pack councils, my voice now carrying a weight it never had before. Rhys, with unwavering confidence, integrated me into every aspect of his leadership, his pride in our bond evident in every glance, every touch. The constant proximity to Rhys, however, was both a blessing and a curse. The make bond, now fully solidified, thrummed between us, a vibrant, inescapable connection that laid his emotions bare to me, and mine, I feared, to him. His joy, his fierce protectiveness, his boundless affection, I felt it all, amplified by the bond. And each wave of his pure emotion deepened the chasm of guilt within me. I learned to build subtle mental walls, not to block the bond entirely, which was impossible, but to shield the darkest corners of my mind, the agonizing memories of that fateful night. My days were filled with new responsibilities. I helped organize patrols, oversaw the pack's communal stores, and mediated minor disputes. I found a quiet satisfaction in contributing to the pack's well-being, in serving a community that had offered me solace. Yet, every moment of peace was tinged with the pervasive anxiety of discovery. The Shadow Peak pack, Rhys's birth pack, they were a constant, looming threat in my thoughts. Their territory bordered ours, their alliance a long-standing tradition. Visits between the packs were common, particularly for large gatherings like the annual hunt or the solstice festival. It was only a matter of time before someone from Shadow Peak would recognize me. Not as Lyra, the mechanic's daughter who had joined Riverbend, but as the rogue, the outsider, the killer who had crossed their lands years ago. The memory of Arya, Rhys's sister, haunted my waking hours. She had been a powerful warrior, fierce and unyielding. The confrontation, sparked by a desperate attempt to protect my then small, vulnerable pack from encroaching Shadow Peak hunters, had escalated quickly. It was a blur of snarling wolves, desperate lunges, and the sickening snap of bone. I had acted purely on instinct, to defend my own, to create a diversion for them to escape. Her death was an accident, a tragic consequence of territorial aggression, but an undeniable fact. My pack had scattered in the aftermath, leaving me alone, wounded, and branded with the memory of a life taken. Riverbend had found me, bleeding and broken, and offered me a chance at a new existence, unaware of the bloody history clinging to my soul. One afternoon, as I walked the perimeter of the territory with a small patrol, the familiar scent of Shadow Peak wolves drifted on the wind. It was not an aggressive scent, but a territorial marker, a reminder of their close proximity. My heart lurched, a cold dread washing over me. "The annual hunt is approaching," one of the younger warriors commented, oblivious to my internal turmoil. "Always good to see the Shadow Peak pack. Strong warriors, good allies." "Yes," I managed, forcing a neutral tone. "Good allies." The thought of facing them, of seeing their familiar faces, especially their alpha, Rhys's father, sent a tremor through me. Would he recognize me? Would the scent of his daughter's killer cling to me even after all these years? The wolf within me tensed, a primal instinct to flee warring with the desperate need to protect the life I had built here, with Rhys. That night, as Rhys held me close in the quiet solitude of his den, his warmth a comforting anchor, I found myself studying his sleeping face, the strong lines of his jaw, the gentle curve of his lips. He looked so peaceful, so trusting. How could I ever shatter that peace? How could I tell him that the hand he held, the body he cherished, had been stained with the blood of his beloved sister? The mate bond, usually a source of profound connection, now felt like a suffocating chain. It bound me to him, yet also trapped me in a cage of my own making, a prisoner of my devastating secret. I longed to confess, to unburden my soul, to seek his understanding, perhaps even his forgiveness. But the fear, the absolute terror of losing him, of seeing the love in his golden eyes turn to hatred, held my tongue captive. I knew the consequences of such a revelation. The mate bond was sacred, but pack law, the unwritten rules of justice, was even more so. The killer of an alpha's kin could not be allowed to live, mate bond or not. The thought sent a chill through me, even in the warmth of his embrace. I was living on borrowed time. Every day, a delicate tightrope walk above an abyss. The annual hunt loomed, a stark reminder of the fragile peace I inhabited, a peace that was destined to shatter with the inevitable arrival of the Shadow Peak pack. The air grew heavy with anticipation as the annual hunt drew near, a palpable shift in the pack's energy. For generations, the joint hunt with the Shadow Peak pack had been a cornerstone of their alliance, a test of skill, a celebration of bounty, and a reaffirmation of their shared bonds. For me, however, it felt like an approaching storm, each passing day bringing me closer to an inevitable confrontation with my past. My senses were heightened, not by the thrill of the hunt, but by a pervasive dread, an acute awareness of every scent, every sound, searching for the first sign of the approaching Shadow Peak wolves. Rhys, oblivious to my internal turmoil, was excited. He spoke of the hunt with a keen enthusiasm, reminiscing about past triumphs with his father, the Alpha of Shadow Peak, and his siblings. He spoke of Arya, his voice tinged with a familiar sadness, remembering her prowess as a hunter. Each anecdote was a fresh stab of guilt, a brutal reminder of the life I had extinguished. "My father will be eager to meet you, Lyra," Rhys said one evening, his arm wrapped around me as we surveyed the sunset from a high ridge. "He's always heard good things about the Riverbend warriors, but he'll want to see for himself the Luna who captured his son's heart." His pride was evident, almost palpable through the bond, and it tore at my soul. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting into knots. "I look forward to meeting him, Rhys." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I dreaded it. More than anyone, Rhys's father, Alpha Thorne, would remember. He would recognize the rogue, the one who had disappeared after the incident. Even after all these years, I knew he wouldn't forget the face of his daughter's killer. The night before the hunt, sleep eluded me. I lay beside Rhys, listening to his steady breathing, the bond a warm, reassuring presence. But the warmth couldn't penetrate the icy grip of fear around my heart. My mind replayed that horrific night, not as a blurry nightmare, but with startling clarity. My former pack, small and desperate, had stumbled into Shadow Peak territory, driven by hunger and a desperate need for new hunting grounds. We were trespassers, and the Shadow Peak wolves, powerful and territorial, had reacted with swift aggression. Arya had been at the forefront of their defense, a formidable warrior, her eyes burning with righteous fury. The fight was brutal, chaotic. My pack, outmatched, had tried to retreat, but Arya had cornered our weakest, a young, injured she-wolf. I had intervened, a primal scream tearing from my throat, a desperate lunge to protect my kin. It was swift, brutal, and ultimately, a tragic mistake. Her death was not intentional, but a consequence of the desperate fight for survival. In the ensuing chaos, my pack had scattered, leaving me alone to face the consequences, or to flee. I had chosen the latter, my wounds deep, my heart heavy with the impossible choice I had been forced to make. Riverbend found me months later, broken and adrift. They asked no questions about my past, simply offering me a chance to heal, a chance to belong. I had clung to that chance, building a new life on a foundation of unspoken truths. Now, that foundation was crumbling. The next morning, the Riverbend pack gathered at the agreed-upon meeting point, a wide clearing near the territorial border. The air buzzed with a nervous excitement. I stood beside Rhys, my wolf form sleek and alert, though my internal state was anything but calm. The wind shifted, carrying new scents. And then they appeared. The Shadow Peak pack, powerful, disciplined, their forms flowing from the tree line, like shadows given substance. My breath hitched. My eyes immediately sought out their alpha, Alpha Thorne. He was older now, his muzzle flecked with gray, but his eyes still held the piercing intensity I remembered. He moved with an innate authority, his presence commanding respect. Beside him, his beta, a formidable male, and a few other key members of their pack. As the two alphas met in the center of the clearing, their greetings respectful but formal, my gaze swept over the Shadow Peak wolves. Most were unfamiliar, but a few faces, older warriors, sparked recognition. They were the ones who had been there, who had witnessed the skirmish. I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my wolf suppressed, to control my scent, my every subtle tell. Rhys turned, a proud smile on his face. "Father, this is Lyra, my Luna." He gestured towards me, his hand resting reassuringly on my flank. Alpha Thorne's eyes, dark and piercing, fixed on me. He regarded me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering, assessing. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Did he remember? Was there a flicker of recognition in his ancient eyes? I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tensed, preparing for the inevitable. The mate bond with Rhys, usually a comfort, now vibrated with a raw intensity, picking up Rhys's hopeful anticipation, a stark contrast to my own terror. Alpha Thorne's lips twitched, a barely perceptible movement. "Lyra," he rumbled, his voice deep, his eyes still holding mine in a challenging stare. "A pleasure to finally meet the Luna who has claimed my son's heart. He speaks highly of your strength." He didn't explicitly say he recognized me, but the intensity of his gaze, the deliberate pause before he spoke my name, sent a shiver down my spine. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of suspicion, a ghost of memory. He remembered the rogue. He just hadn't, or couldn't, connect that rogue to Lyra, the Luna of Riverbend. Not yet. The hunt began then, the tension of the encounter momentarily eclipsed by the primal thrill of the chase. But as I ran through the forest, the familiar exhilaration of the hunt dulled by a pervasive dread. I knew my time was running out. Alpha Thorne was a wise and perceptive alpha. It was only a matter of time before the pieces clicked into place, before the truth, sharp and devastating, pierced through the fragile illusion I had carefully constructed. The bond with Rhys, so precious, felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment it would either shatter or somehow, impossibly, endure. The hunt was a blur of adrenaline and heightened senses, a desperate attempt to lose myself in the primal thrill of the chase, to outrun the gnawing dread that clung to me like a second skin. I moved with practiced efficiency alongside Rhys and his pack, my wolf flowing through the undergrowth, her focus razor-sharp. I could feel Rhys's powerful presence beside me, his scent a grounding force, but even the exhilaration of the hunt couldn't entirely mask the icy grip of fear that Alpha Thorne's piercing gaze had instilled. He hadn't explicitly recognized me, but the sheer intensity of his scrutiny spoke volumes. He remembered the rogue, of that I was certain. He just hadn't connected that rogue to me, Luna of the Riverbend Pack, his son's mate. Yet. But Alpha Thorne was known for his sharp memory and even sharper instincts. It was only a matter of time. After the successful hunt, the packs gathered for the feast, a sprawling affair under the fading light of dusk. Laughter and satisfied murmurs filled the air as the bounty was shared. I moved through the crowd, offering congratulations, exchanging pleasantries, my senses constantly on alert. I kept a careful distance from Alpha Thorne, engaging in polite, brief conversations when necessary, but always subtly steering away from any topic that might lead back to my past. Rhys, meanwhile, was in his element, holding court with his father, their voices low and companionable, as they discussed strategies and shared memories. I watched them, a pang of bittersweet longing piercing my heart. He was so proud, so happy. How could I shatter that? The thought of revealing the truth, of seeing the love in his eyes replaced by utter devastation, was a pain almost too great to bear. As the evening wore on, the two alphas called a meeting of the lead warriors from both packs to discuss territorial boundaries and future cooperative efforts. I, as Luna, was expected to attend. It was an unavoidable command. We gathered in a secluded clearing, the firelight casting flickering shadows on our faces. Alpha Thorne sat opposite Rhys, his gaze sweeping over the assembled warriors. My heart pounded against my ribs. I sat beside Rhys, striving for an outward appearance of calm, my hands resting loosely in my lap. The discussion flowed, focused on patrols, potential challenges from rogue packs, and the general welfare of their allied territories. My mind, however, was running a parallel track, every nerve ending tingling with awareness, constantly assessing Alpha Thorne's reactions, searching for any sign of a dawning recognition. At one point, the conversation shifted to past skirmishes, the inevitable conflicts that arose between neighboring packs. Alpha Thorne's voice grew graver. There was a period, years ago, when we had some particularly aggressive incursions. Rogue elements, driven by desperation, encroached on our hunting grounds. It resulted in unpleasantness. We lost a good warrior then. My blood ran cold. He was talking about it. About Arya. Rhys's face clouded with sorrow. Arya, he murmured, his voice heavy. She was a fierce protector, father. A terrible loss. Alpha Thorne's eyes, dark and piercing, settled on me. Indeed, Rhys. A terrible loss. A true warrior. He paused, his gaze unwavering, an unspoken question in their depths. And the one who took her life she escaped. A rogue, an outsider. We never found her. The words hung in the air, heavy and menacing. He was looking directly at me. It wasn't accusatory, not yet, but it was testing. He was speaking of Arya's killer, watching my reaction, searching for a tell. The mate bond with Rhys flared, picking up his raw grief, making my own guilt almost unbearable. My wolf trembled within me, desperate to confess, to throw herself at his mercy, to escape the suffocating weight of the lie. But self-preservation and the primal fear of losing Rhys held me captive. I forced myself to meet Alpha Thorne's gaze, my expression carefully neutral, my breathing shallow. A terrible tragedy, Alpha Thorne, I said, my voice steady, though it felt like a monumental effort. Such losses wound a pack deeply. His eyes narrowed, a subtle shift, a flicker of something unreadable. He searched my face, my eyes, as if trying to peer into my soul. I kept my guard up, every fiber of my being focused on maintaining the facade. I remembered the details of that day, with vivid, agonizing clarity. I knew the specific wound that had felled Arya. I knew the scent of her blood. I knew the terror of being hunted by her pack in the aftermath. It was a secret woven so deeply into my being that it was almost impossible to keep contained under such intense scrutiny. The conversation eventually shifted, moving away from the past, much to my relief. But the encounter had left me shaken to my core. Alpha Thorne was testing me. He remembered enough. He was suspicious. It was no longer a question of if he would discover the truth, but when. That night, back in Rhys's den, the bond felt both suffocating and utterly essential. I clung to him, seeking solace in his presence, knowing that this fragile peace was fleeting. The image of Alpha Thorne's piercing gaze, his deliberate words, haunted me. I knew I couldn't wait for him to uncover the truth. I had to act. But what action could I possibly take that wouldn't utterly destroy Rhys, and by extension, me? The silence of the den pressed in on me, filled with the unspoken accusation of a past that now threatened to consume our fragile present. Sleep offered no reprieve. My dreams were a tormented kaleidoscope of fragmented memories. Arya's snarling face, the flash of teeth, the desperate lunge, the subsequent scattering of my old pack like leaves in a furious wind. I woke with a gasp, the scent of fear heavy in the air, my own. Rhys stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist, pulling me closer. The make bond, a soothing hum, instantly began to chase away the lingering tendrils of the nightmare. His presence was a balm, a stark contrast to the terror that still clenched my heart. "Bad dream, Lyra," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, his warmth a comforting anchor. "Just a memory," I whispered, not a lie, but a partial truth. "Of my old pack, before Riverbend," he hummed, understanding. "The past can be a heavy burden, my mate, but you're safe here, with me, with our pack." His words, meant to soothe, only intensified the ache of guilt. He saw me as a victim of a lost past, not the perpetrator of a hidden tragedy. The next morning, the tension of the previous evening lingered like a stale scent. Alpha Thorne remained at the Riverbend territory, presumably for further discussions with Rhys about alliance matters, but his presence was a constant, unnerving reminder of the sword hanging over my head. I kept myself busy, immersing myself in Luna duties, attempting to project an air of calm and competence. But every casual glance from a Shadow Peak warrior, every shared conversation, felt laden with potential peril. Later that day, as I was overseeing the distribution of the hunt's bounty, I saw Alpha Thorne speaking with Willow, the she-wolf Rhys had been expected to claim. Willow was a gentle soul, the perceptive, and she had been present during my arrival at Riverbend years ago. My stomach tightened. What were they discussing? Could Willow have unknowingly revealed some detail about my past, perhaps a vague mention of my injuries or my solitary arrival, details that might connect the dots for Alpha Thorne? I discreetly moved closer, feigning interest in the pack's younger members. Their conversation was low, but I caught snippets. Willow spoke of the Riverbend pack, its resilience, its growth. Alpha Thorne nodded, his gaze distant, as if sifting through memories. "Riverbend has always been a strong pack," he mused. "But it truly began to flourish after you, Lyra, came here. A strange twist of fate. An outsider finding a home and becoming such a vital part of the pack. His words were benign, yet laced with a subtle probing that made my skin prickle. Willow, unaware of the hidden subtext, simply smiled. "Lyra is indeed remarkable, Alpha Thorne. She brought a new kind of strength to us. She was so wounded when we found her, almost beyond hope." Alpha Thorne's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "Wounded?" he repeated, his voice casual, but with an underlying sharpness. "From what, if you don't mind me asking?" My breath hitched. This was it. The line of questioning was too direct, too pointed. I knew what he was doing. He was cross-referencing, piecing together the timeline, the details of a rogue's sudden appearance in Riverbend territory with the disappearance of the rogue responsible for Arya's death. The blood drained from my face, a cold dread washing over me. "A rogue attack," I interjected smoothly, stepping forward before Willow could offer any more incriminating details. My voice was calm, controlled, betraying none of the panic that surged through me. "A small, desperate group. I was separated from my old pack. Almost didn't make it. Riverbend offered me sanctuary. It was a practiced lie, one I had told a few times when pressed, always vague, always just enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing too much." Alpha Thorne turned his piercing gaze on me, his eyes sharp, assessing. He looked from me to Willow, then back to me, weighing my words, scrutinizing my expression. He remembered the reports from his own patrols, the scattered remnants of a rogue group, the lone wolf that had escaped after Arya's death, presumed wounded. The pieces were falling into place for him. "Indeed," Alpha Thorne rumbled, his voice low, his eyes never leaving mine. "A harsh world for lone wolves. You are fortunate to have found such a strong pack, Luna Lyra. And Rhys is fortunate to have found such a resourceful mate." The word resourceful hung in the air, a subtle double meaning that felt like an accusation. A cold certainty settled in my heart. He knew, or at the very least, he strongly suspected. His words, his gaze, the deliberate framing of his questions, it was all a carefully orchestrated test, and I had just walked into his trap. He hadn't explicitly revealed his knowledge, but he had laid down a gauntlet. The unspoken challenge resonated between us, a silent declaration of war. Later that evening, after the last of the Shadow Peak wolves had departed, leaving the Riverbend territory with a newfound, unsettling quiet, Rhys came to our den. He looked troubled, his golden eyes shadowed. "My father," he began, his voice hesitant. "He asked me some questions about your past, about your old pack. He seems concerned about something." My heart pounded. This was my chance to confess, to tell him everything before Alpha Thorne did. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with fear and the agonizing realization of what I was about to risk. I looked into his worried face, the face of the man who had claimed me, loved me, and trusted me implicitly. Could I bear to see that trust shatter? To watch the love in his eyes turn to hatred? The mate bond thrummed between us, a desperate plea for honesty, warring with the instinct for self-preservation. My wolf whimpered, torn between exposing her deepest wound and protecting her fragile peace. I opened my mouth, a confession forming on my tongue, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Not when the cost was so unimaginably high. I knew I needed to buy myself more time, however desperate. I needed to understand Alpha Thorne's plan, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The truth, I realized, was no longer a secret I could keep. It was a storm gathering on the horizon, and I had to find a way to weather it, or be utterly destroyed. The quiet tension that settled over Riverbend after the Shadow Peak Pack's departure was thick enough to taste. Rhys was clearly troubled by his father's questions, a subtle uneasiness now clinging to him, perceptible through the mate bond. I felt his lingering concern, his unspoken queries, but I maintained my facade, offering vague reassurances about my past being simply a painful, distant memory. He respected my privacy, his trust in me unwavering, and that trust was a constant, aching burden on my soul. I knew Alpha Thorne wouldn't act rashly. He was a strategic leader, a calculating wolf who would gather all his facts before making a move. He wouldn't risk destabilizing the alliance between Riverbend and Shadow Peak without absolute certainty. That gave me a small window, a precious reprieve to prepare for the storm. But prepare for what, exactly? Confession? Escape? Neither seemed tenable without destroying everything. My days became a meticulous dance of duty and dread. I immersed myself in lunar responsibilities, organizing patrols, ensuring the pack's well-being, attempting to project an image of unwavering competence and unwavering loyalty to Rhys and Riverbend. But beneath the surface, my mind raced, analyzing every possible scenario, every consequence. One crisp afternoon, while on a solo patrol near the border, my heightened senses picked up a faint, unfamiliar scent, subtle but distinct. It wasn't Shadow Peak, but it was a wolf scent, and it was moving with unusual stealth, far from any established paths. My instincts screamed caution. I followed it, my wolf low to the ground, moving silently through the dense undergrowth. The scent led me to a small, hidden clearing, a place rarely visited even by the pack's most seasoned hunters. There, partially concealed by thick bushes, were faint signs of a temporary encampment. Disturbed earth, a small, extinguished fire pit, and the lingering scent of 2, possibly 3, distinct wolves. They were not from Riverbend, nor were they Shadow Peak. They were outsiders, and they were trespassing. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Rogue wolves. But not just any rogues. The scent, though faint, carried a familiar undertone, a faint echo of the desperate scattered remnants of my old pack. Could it be? After all these years? I moved closer, inspecting the site with meticulous care. And then I saw it, tucked beneath a loose stone. A small, crudely carved wooden figurine, a totem I recognized instantly. It was a symbol of my old pack, a protective charm, passed down through generations. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was them. Or at least, some of them. They were alive, and they were here, lurking on Riverbend territory. The discovery brought a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief that they had survived, but also profound fear. Their presence here was a catastrophic risk. If Alpha Thorne discovered them, he would instantly connect them to me, and the truth of my past would be undeniable. Their presence could also provoke a territorial skirmish, jeopardizing the delicate balance between Riverbend and Shadow Peak. I quickly obliterated any trace of their camp, meticulously scattering leaves and earth over the disturbed ground, stamping out their scent. My mind raced, trying to understand why they were here and what they planned to do. Were they simply seeking refuge, or were they here for a more sinister purpose? That night, I kept the discovery to myself. I couldn't risk alarming Rhys or the pack without understanding the full implications. But the knowledge gnawed at me. My past was not just knocking, it was now physically present, a tangible threat on Riverbend soil. The next few days were a blur of internal strategizing. I intensified my solo patrols, moving along the borders, hoping to intercept my old pack members, to understand their intentions before they caused any irreparable damage. The mate bond with Rhys, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a conduit for my surging anxiety, and I fought desperately to keep my turmoil hidden from him. Then, the inevitable happened. While on patrol near the western edge of the territory, I caught a new scent, distinct and powerful, belonging to one of the Shadow Peak Alpha Thorne's personal guard, a skilled tracker named Kale. He was too close, moving with purpose. He was actively searching for something, or someone, and my stomach clenched. He was tracking the rogue scent. He was closing in on my old pack. My heart pounded with a desperate urgency. I knew Kale's reputation. He was relentless, methodical. If he found my old pack, he would certainly alert Alpha Thorne, and the truth would be exposed in the most catastrophic way possible, leading to a confrontation that could destroy both me and the fragile alliance. I had to intervene. I had to divert him, to somehow make him lose the trail. It was a reckless move, one that could expose me, but the alternative was far worse. I shifted, my wolf moving with silent swiftness through the dense undergrowth, carefully placing my scent, strategically overlapping tracks, creating confusing trails designed to mislead even the most skilled tracker. I knew every inch of this territory, every hidden path, every deceptive current of wind. It was a desperate gamble, a race against time, with my past, my present, and my future hanging in the balance. The truth was closing in, and I had to decide, in this desperate moment, whether to run, to fight, or to finally, irrevocably, lay bare the secret that had haunted my entire adult life. The adrenaline surged through my veins as I moved, a phantom in the forest, deliberately weaving a tapestry of false scents and misleading tracks. Kale was good, relentlessly methodical, but I knew this territory with an intimacy born of years of solitary patrols and a primal instinct for survival. My wolf, usually calm and composed, was a whirlwind of frantic energy, a desperate dance between protection and exposure. I laid down a strong, fresh trail leading away from my old pack's hidden encampment, then doubled back, creating confusing loops, using the natural terrain to my advantage. I heard Kale's frustrated snarls in the distance, a clear indication that my efforts were having an effect. He was losing the trail, his concentration broken by the contradictory scents and confusing paths. But I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. He was a relentless tracker. He would eventually pick up the true scent again. I needed a more definitive diversion, something that would draw him far away, permanently. My mind raced. I thought of the old abandoned hunter's cabin, deep within a seldom used section of the territory, close to the rocky outcrops that formed a natural barrier. It was a risky idea, but it was the best, perhaps only, chance. I carefully laid a strong, singular trail towards the cabin, using a less direct route, hoping to lure Kale into a prolonged chase. Then, I doubled back once more, returning to a safe distance, carefully observing. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Kale's powerful form burst through the tree line, his muzzle to the ground, tracking my false trail with renewed vigor. He followed it towards the abandoned cabin, his focus absolute. I watched him disappear into the deeper woods, a wave of desperate relief washing over me. He was gone, for now. But the cost of that diversion, the sheer audacity of it, hung heavy in the air. I had deliberately led a Shadow Peak warrior on a wild chase, a clear act of defiance if discovered. I immediately returned to the hidden encampment of my old pack. They needed to move, and they needed to move now. As I approached, I smelled them more clearly, 2 wolves, a male and a female. The male's scent was vaguely familiar, a faint echo from my past, but the female's was completely new to me. They were hidden deep in the undergrowth, their fear palpable. "You need to leave," I whispered, my voice low, shifting to my human form as I cautiously approached their hiding spot. "Now, Alpha Thorne's tracker is on your trail. He almost found you." Two wary faces peered out from the dense foliage. The male, thin and haggard, his eyes wide with fear, was indeed one of the younger warriors from my old pack, though he was almost unrecognizable now, worn down by years of hardship. The female, smaller and seemingly younger, huddled behind him. "Lyra," the male gasped, his voice raspy, disbelief etched on his face. "Is that really you? We heard you were gone." "I'm here," I said, my voice urgent. "And you cannot stay. This is Riverbend territory, and the Shadow Peak Alpha is suspicious of my presence here. If he links me to you, everything will be exposed, you'll be hunted, and I will lose everything." "We didn't know where else to go," the male rasped, desperation in his eyes. "Our packy, it's almost gone. We've been chased for months. We heard rumors of a safe passage near here, to the northern lands." "There is no safe passage here," I stated firmly. "Not now. Not while Shadow Peak patrols are heightened. You must go west, along the forgotten riverbed. It's a longer route, but it's less traveled. Move quickly, and don't leave any trace." I pressed a small crude map I had drawn in my mind into his hands. He hesitated, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. You're the Luna here now? With the Riverbend Alpha?" I nodded, my jaw clenched. "Yes, and for the sake of the life I've built, and for your own survival, you must leave. Now. Don't look back." He looked at the younger female, then back at me. A silent agreement passing between them. "Thank you, Lyra," he whispered, a profound gratitude in his eyes. "We owe you our lives." "Just go," I urged, my voice softening slightly. "And be safe." They shifted, two shadowy forms melting into the trees, moving with a renewed sense of urgency towards the west. I watched them go, a complex mix of relief and sorrow swirling within me. My past, now on the run again, but also a stark reminder of the desperate choices that had shaped my life. I obliterated any remaining trace of their presence, then returned to the main Riverbend territory, my heart pounding with the twin weights of the secret I had just protected, and the knowledge that Kale was still out there, somewhere, tracking my false trail. The deception was holding, for now, but I knew this wasn't the end. The presence of my old pack, even for a fleeting moment, had intensified the precariousness of my situation. The fragile peace I shared with Rhys felt more delicate than ever, perched on the precipice of an inevitable revelation. The quiet hours after my old pack's hurried departure were fraught with a new kind of tension. I had managed to divert Kale, but the act itself was a gamble, a risky maneuver that could easily unravel my carefully constructed life. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I moved through my Luna duties with a practiced efficiency, but my senses were constantly outward, monitoring for any sign of Kale's return, or worse, Alpha Thorne's sudden appearance. Rhys, perceiving my heightened state but misunderstanding its cause, attributed it to the lingering effects of the hunt and the recent Shadow Peak presence. He was solicitous, his concern radiating through the mate bond, which only amplified my guilt. I felt the desire to confess, to unburden myself of the secret that was eating me alive, but the immediate threat of Alpha Thorne's suspicion and now the potential discovery of my old pack on his lands paralyzed me. The next morning, the sun rose, painting the eastern sky in hues of orange and gold, but it brought no solace. As I helped organize the morning patrols, a familiar scent drifted on the wind, sharper this time, closer. Kale. He was back, and he was clearly frustrated. I felt his presence before I saw him, a ripple of controlled anger in the air. He emerged from the tree line at the edge of the clearing, his fur disheveled, a subtle snarl on his muzzle. He looked tired, his usual sharp alertness replaced by a weary determination. He walked directly towards Rhys, who was overseeing the pack's morning stretches. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. "Alpha Rhys," Kale rumbled, his voice strained. "My apologies. I lost the scent. A strange, confusing trail near the western border. Someone deliberately misled me." His eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered towards me for a fleeting second, a subtle accusation in their depths, before returning to Rhys. He suspected. He didn't have proof, but he suspected. Rhys's brow furrowed. "Misled you, Kale? Who would dare?" His gaze swept across the clearing, then settled on me, a question in his golden eyes. The mate bond buzzed with his unspoken query. "Do you know anything about this, Lyra?" I met his gaze, my expression calm, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Perhaps a clever rogue, Alpha Rhys," I said, my voice steady. "Our borders are always a challenge to maintain. Sometimes, even the best trackers can be deceived." It was a generic answer, designed to deflect, to offer a plausible explanation without revealing my own culpability. Kale snorted, a low, frustrated sound. "This was no ordinary deception, Luna Lyra. This was the work of someone who knew the territory intimately, someone who understood how to manipulate scents and terrain, almost like an experienced scout." His eyes locked onto mine, a direct challenge. He was testing me, pushing the boundaries, trying to draw a reaction. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. An experienced scout. Someone like me, a former warrior, a tracker in my own right, intimately familiar with the art of evasion. Rhys's gaze sharpened, a flicker of suspicion finally entering his eyes. The mate bond, usually a clear conduit, now felt clouded, a faint sense of betrayal, of uncertainty, rising within him. He was starting to connect the dots, the strange energy he had felt from me, Alpha Thorne's pointed questions, and now Kale's veiled accusations. This was my last chance. I couldn't let them piece it together, not through accusations and half-truths. The story had to come from me, on my terms, however devastating. The fear of losing Rhys was immense, but the thought of his trust being irrevocably shattered by a discovery rather than a confession was far worse. I took a deep breath, the decision crystallizing in my mind, stark and terrifying. This was the precipice. I had to jump. "Kale is right, Alpha Rhys," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the tense silence. Every eye in the clearing turned to me. Rhys's golden eyes widened, surprise warring with a growing apprehension. "It was a deliberate deception, and I am responsible for it." A collective gasp swept through the pack. Whispers immediately erupted, a low murmur of shock and confusion. Kale's eyes widened, a flicker of triumph mixed with disbelief. He hadn't expected me to confess. Not so openly, not so immediately. Rhys, his face pale, stared at me, the mate bond suddenly a discordant thrum, vibrating with confusion and pain. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, a warning note in it. "What are you saying?" I met his gaze, my heart breaking with every word I was about to utter, but my resolve firm. "I misled Cale, Rhys, to protect someone, to protect them from Shadow Peak, from your father." The last words were spoken with a raw honesty that left no room for doubt. The whispers grew louder, morphing into incredulous murmurs. Cale's jaw clenched, his eyes now burning with a fierce, possessive anger. Rhys, his chest heaving, took a step back, the mate bond screaming with shock and betrayal. His golden eyes, moments ago filled with love, were now clouded with a dawning horror, a terrible understanding. "Why, Lyra?" he rasped, his voice raw with disbelief. "Why would you do this? Who were you protecting from my father?" I took another deep breath, the final, agonizing plunge. "My old pack, Rhys, what's left of them. They were trespassing. They were desperate. And I couldn't let them be found. Not by Shadow Peak, not by Alpha Thorne." My gaze met his, unwavering, accepting the inevitable condemnation that was about to rain down upon me. "Because if they were found, Rhys, if their presence here was linked to mine, the truth of your sister's death, the truth of Aria, would be exposed." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A collective gasp, sharper and more horrified than any before it, ripped through the pack. Silence, heavy and absolute, descended upon the clearing, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. Rhys's face drained of all color. His eyes, wide with unspeakable pain, stared at me as if I were a stranger, a monster. The mate bond, once a source of exquisite connection, now felt like a searing burn, tearing at the very fabric of my being, vibrating with his utter devastation. The secret was out, and the silence was deafening. The silence that followed my confession was a crushing weight, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. Every eye in the clearing was fixed on me, wide with shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. The Riverbend pack, usually a harmonious unit, seemed to fracture around us, the unity of moments before shattered by the seismic revelation. Rhys, his face ashen, stood frozen, his eyes, once alight with fierce love, now reflecting a profound, unspeakable pain. The mate bond, a vibrant, continuous hum, had abruptly snapped into a jagged, searing line, vibrating with his utter devastation. I felt his shock, his betrayal, the raw agony of his heart tearing in two. It was a pain that mirrored my own, magnified 100-fold through our connection. Cale, Alpha Thorne's tracker, was the first to move. His eyes, burning with a furious recognition, locked onto me. He took a predatory step forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest, a clear signal of his intent. "You!" he snarled, his voice thick with venom. "It was you, the rogue. You killed Aria." The accusation hung in the air, shattering the last vestiges of fragile calm. The Riverbend warriors shifted, their instincts warring between defending their Luna and understanding the monstrous accusation. Some recoiled, their faces contorting in disgust. Others looked at Rhys, uncertain, waiting for his command. Rhys remained silent, his gaze still fixed on me, his chest heaving with silent anguish. His face was a mask of disbelief, his mind reeling from the unthinkable truth. He was processing it, the years of trust, of love, of shared dreams, crashing down around him in an instant. I met Cale's furious gaze, then turned back to Rhys, my voice ragged with emotion, but firm. "It was an accident, Rhys. A terrible, tragic accident. Years ago. My pack was desperate, starving. We encroached on Shadow Peak territory. Arya, she cornered one of our weakest, a young, injured she-wolf. I acted to protect my kin. It was instinct, self-preservation. I didn't mean for her to die. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. The truth I had carried for so long finally escaping, even as I knew it would condemn me. Kale let out a guttural roar, shifting halfway into his wolf form, his teeth bared. Lies! She was a warrior, a killer. There is no accident when an alpha's kin falls. You hunted her. You murdered her. He lunged forward, pure rage propelling him. Before Kale could reach me, Rhys moved. It was a blur of powerful muscles and raw, primal fury. He didn't move towards me, but positioned himself between me and Kale, his own wolf surging, a guttural snarl tearing from his throat, his eyes blazing with terrifying, untamed gold. "Stand down, Kale," Rhys roared, his voice vibrating with an authority I had never heard from him. A raw, protective instinct overriding his own pain. He wasn't defending my actions, not yet, but defending his mate from external aggression. The mate bond, though fractured, still pulsed with his primal need to shield me. Kale skidded to a halt, glaring at Rhys, his rage warring with his ingrained respect for an alpha. "Rhys, she admitted it. She killed your sister. She is a killer. Our alpha will demand justice. My father will be informed." Rhys snapped, his voice dangerously low. "But this is my mate, and this is my pack. I will decide how this is handled." He turned his blazing golden gaze to the Riverbend pack, who were still reeling in shock. "Return to your duties. This matter will be handled by the Alpha." His voice brooked no argument. Slowly, reluctantly, the pack dispersed, leaving us in a clearing charged with tension. Rhys then turned to me, his golden eyes, once filled with love, now burning with an unreadable mixture of betrayal, sorrow, and confusion. He stepped closer, his form towering over me, his scent, usually a comfort, now overwhelming with the raw power of his pain. "Arya," he whispered, his voice broken, a profound anguish ripping through him. "My sister, you were the one?" He reached out, his hand hovering near my face, then dropped it, as if touching me would burn him. The mate bond screamed, a raw, tearing pain that echoed his internal torment. "Why, Lyra? Why did you never tell me?" Tears streamed down my face, hot and unbidden. "I wanted to, Rhys, so many times. But the fear of losing you, of seeing this hatred in your eyes, it paralyzed me. I couldn't bear it." He recoiled, as if my words were physical blows. "Hatred," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "How could you expect anything else? You were bound to me, sharing my life, knowing you had taken the life of my kin. How could you keep such a secret? How could you let me claim you, mark you, when you carried this?" His voice rose, tinged with a desperate anguish. "Every touch, every kiss, every whisper of forever, it was all a lie. You lied to me, Lyra, to your mate." The mate bond, once a lifeline, now felt like a noose, tightening around my throat. I felt his pain, sharp and unbearable, but I also felt the profound, chilling shift in his emotions. The love was still there, a faint, flickering ember, but it was being rapidly consumed by the wildfire of betrayal and grief. He was torn, his instincts as an alpha, as a brother, warring with the powerful, ancient pull of the mate bond. I knew this moment was inevitable. I had prepared for it, dreaded it, lived in fear of it. But no preparation could soften the blow. "Rhys, The man who had given me a home, who had claimed my heart, now looked at me as if I were the enemy. The silence that fell between us was broken only by the ragged sound of his breathing and the silent, shattering cries of our bond. I was stripped bare, exposed, and utterly alone under the piercing gaze of the man who held my fate in his hands. The air crackled with the raw agony of Rhys's betrayal, a palpable force that radiated through the shattered mate bond. His golden eyes, once filled with adoration, now burned with a devastating mix of grief, rage, and profound disbelief. The bond, usually a comforting thrum, pulsed with a discordant, searing pain that echoed his internal torment, a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. "Lies, Lyra," he repeated, his voice hoarse, raw with anguish. "Years of lies. You let me love you. You let me claim you. All while knowing you carried this unspeakable secret." He took a step back, the distance between us suddenly feeling vast and insurmountable. "My sister, Arya, she was fierce, honorable, and you took her life." My heart ached with a pain that rivaled his own. "It wasn't a choice, Rhys. It was a desperate act of survival. My pack was hunted, cornered. She attacked one of ours, a defenseless pup. I reacted. It was chaos, a tragic accident, not cold-blooded murder." Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision. I carry that night with me every day. The guilt, the regret, it never leaves me. But I couldn't tell you. How could I? How could I ask you to love the killer of your kin? He let out a guttural growl, a sound of pure anguish that tore through me. "You should have told me, before the claim, before this bond." He gestured wildly between us, a gesture of both profound connection and utter devastation. "You condemned us both, Lyra. You trapped us in this impossible situation." The other Riverbend pack members, though dispersed, still cast uneasy glances our way, their whispers a low hum in the background. Kale, though forced to retreat, stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes blazing with a vengeful satisfaction. His presence was a stark reminder that this wasn't just a private tragedy. It was a matter of pack law, of alliance, of justice. "What justice, Rhys?" I countered, my voice laced with desperation. "For a desperate act in a territorial skirmish? A moment of instinct, of protection? My pack was scattered. I was wounded, alone. I built a new life here, with you, with Riverbend. I earned my place. I poured my soul into this pack. And you stained it with a lie," he roared, his wolf surging, his form shimmering with the raw power of his untamed emotions. The air around him crackled, charged with his fury. "Every moment we shared tainted. My father, my pack. They will demand justice, Lyra. Justice for Arya. And what then? What do I tell them? What do I tell them? What do I do with you, my mate, my sister's killer?" His words ripped through me, each one a fresh wound. He was torn, his love for me warring with his loyalty to his pack, his grief for his sister. The mate bond, though agonizing, still clung, a fragile thread connecting our breaking hearts. It was a cruel irony, this unbreakable bond that bound me to the very person I had so grievously wronged. "I will face whatever consequences come, Rhys," I said, my voice steady, accepting my fate. "I always knew this day might come. I just prayed it wouldn't. But I will not lie about the truth of that night. It was survival, and I would do it again to protect my kin." The last words were a declaration, not of defiance, but of a fundamental part of who I was, a protector, even if it meant my own destruction. His jaw clenched, his eyes squeezed shut for a moment as if in unbearable pain. When they opened again, the golden glow had receded, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. The Alpha had reasserted control over the distraught mate. "You will come with me," he commanded, his voice devoid of warmth, formal, almost detached. "We will go to my den. We will discuss this. And then we will face my father." He didn't offer his hand, didn't touch me. The physical distance felt like an emotional chasm. I nodded, my heart sinking. "As you command, Alpha Rhys." The use of his title, rather than his name, was a deliberate echo of his detachment, a stark acknowledgement of the new, terrible dynamic between us. As we walked towards his den, the silence between us was heavier than any words, filled with the echoes of shattered trust and impending doom. The mate bond throbbed, a dull, aching pulse, a phantom limb suddenly in excruciating pain. My life, the fragile piece I had built, was crumbling around me, each step bringing me closer to an unknown fate. Would he kill me? Or would the bond, against all odds, hold a stronger sway? The answer seemed to hang in the desolate air of the clearing, a question mark etched into the very fabric of our broken bond. The walk to Rhys's den felt like an endless march to an execution. The vibrant energy of the pack, usually a comforting presence, now felt distant, their silent judgment a palpable weight. Rhys strode ahead, his posture rigid, his usual confident gait replaced by a grim determination. The mate bond, a raw, exposed nerve, throbbed with his turmoil. A constant reminder of the devastation I had wrought. It amplified his pain, his betrayal, turning my own guilt into a searing agony. Once inside the den, the familiar warmth and comforting sense felt alien, tainted by the heavy pall of unspoken accusations. Rhys turned, his eyes still holding that terrible, unreadable mix of anguish and cold resolve. He paced, a restless predator, while I stood silently, bracing myself for the inevitable. "Tell me everything, Lyra," he commanded, his voice low, controlled, every trace of his mate's tenderness meticulously stripped away. "Every detail of that night. Do not leave out anything. I need to understand." So, I told him. I recounted the desperate plight of my former pack, driven by starvation and encroaching human settlements. I described the accidental foray into Shadow Peak territory, the immediate aggression from Aria's patrol, her fierce determination to eliminate my kin. I spoke of the brutal chaos of the skirmish, the blur of snarling forms, the primal instinct to protect the weakest of my own. I didn't spare myself, recounting the fatal blow, the sickening realization that I had taken a life. I described the aftermath, my pack scattering, my own injuries, the subsequent months of isolation and fear before Riverbend found me, broken and alone. I spoke of the agonizing burden of the secret, the desperate longing to confess, and the paralyzing fear of losing him. As I spoke, Rhys listened in silence, his face a mask of stone, till I could feel the tremors of his pain reverberating through the bond. His jaw was clenched so tightly, I feared his teeth would crack. When I finished, the silence in the den was profound, broken only by our ragged breathing. "An accident," he finally rasped, the word tasting like ash on his tongue. "You claim it was an accident, but my sister is dead. By your hand." "I never denied that, Rhys," I countered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I acted in defense of my pack, a tragic consequence of a territorial dispute that escalated beyond control. I mourn her, truly. Her death changed my life forever." He scoffed, a bitter sound. Mourn her? While you lived a lie in my pack, under my protection, then allowed me to claim you, to bind us together? He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his body taut with unspoken anguish. How could you allow this to happen, Lyra? I loved you, Rhys, I confessed, the words tearing from my throat. I loved you too much to risk losing you, and every day I promised myself I would tell you. But then the bond grew, and the fear grew, and I became a coward. He whirled around, his eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and fury. Cowardice, Lyra, is a luxury I cannot afford. Not now. Not when my pack, my father, will demand answers. Demands justice. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. What would he do? The mate bond pulled relentlessly, a primal force screaming for connection, for unity, even as the chasm between our realities widened. He was torn between his love for me, the unbreakable tie of our bond, and his absolute duty as an alpha, a son, a brother. I will not beg for my life, Rhys, I stated, my voice firm despite the tremor in my soul. I will face whatever judgment your pack or Shadow Peak deems fit. I only ask for one thing. Understand that my actions that night were driven by a desperate need to protect my kin. It was not malice. He stared at me, his gaze unreadable, the internal battle raging within him palpable through the bond. The air in the den crackled with unspoken decisions, with the weight of our intertwined destinies. Finally, he nodded slowly, a grim determination hardening his features. My father will be here within the hour, he announced, his voice devoid of emotion, the Alpha taking full command. I summoned him as soon as Kale reported his findings. I intended to seek his counsel on this matter before I knew the full truth. Now, he comes for answers, and for justice. My heart plummeted. Alpha Thorne. So soon. The trap had closed. I was truly exposed now. What will you tell him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Rhys met my gaze, his eyes still distant, the pain still raw. The truth, Lyra, all of it. He deserves that much. And then, we will see what happens. He walked to the entrance of the den, pausing for a moment, his broad shoulders squared, a profile of profound anguish and unwavering resolve. He did not look back. I stood alone in the silence, the mate bond a painful thrum, my fate hanging precariously in the balance, a prisoner of a past that refused to stay buried and a present consumed by the agonizing truth. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either shatter my world or redefine the very meaning of love, justice, and the unbreakable power of a mate bond. The hour that followed Rhys's departure to meet his father stretched into an eternity. I remained in his den, the silence pressing in on me, amplified by the absence of his presence, his emotions, which had, until now, been a constant, albeit painful, thrum through our bond. Now, it was a terrifying quiet, a terrifying disconnect, as if he had deliberately distanced himself. Or perhaps the sheer magnitude of his pain had temporarily severed the immediate current between us. Every rustle of leaves outside, every distant howl, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I imagined the scene playing out, Rhys, his face etched with betrayal, confronting his father, Alpha Thorne. The raw grief, the unvarnished truth, the inevitable demand for justice. I pictured Alpha Thorne's piercing gaze, his immediate recognition, the chilling understanding of the deception. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I closed my eyes, seeking solace, but found only the vivid replaying of that fateful night with Arya. I remembered the desperation in my own pack's eyes, the blinding instinct to protect. It wasn't a justification, but an explanation. But defense. Would it be enough? Could it ever be enough for a father who had lost a child? The mate bond, while not entirely severed, felt stretched, thin, a precarious thread humming with an undercurrent of Rhys's immense anguish. I felt his anger, his sorrow, but also, surprisingly, a confusing flicker of something else, a deep, primal conflict, a desperate battle between his duty to his kin and the undeniable pull of our bond. It gave me a sliver of hope, fragile as it was, that perhaps, just perhaps, the ancient magic of our connection held a power beyond even the deepest betrayal. Finally, after what felt like an age, the sounds of approaching footsteps, heavy and deliberate, broke the oppressive silence. Two distinct scents, powerful and authoritative, preceded their arrival. Rhys and Alpha Thorne. Rhys entered first, his face still pale, his jaw set in a grim line. His golden eyes met mine for a fleeting second, devoid of any discernible emotion. Behind him, Alpha Thorne stepped into the den. He was in his wolf form, a magnificent, imposing creature, his fur a deep charcoal gray, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. His scent, usually commanding, was now laced with an undeniable fury, a primal demand for retribution. Rhys stood beside his father, his posture rigid, his loyalty clearly aligned with his pack and kin, at least for this moment. The unspoken message was clear. I was an outsider now, a threat. Alpha Thorne's gaze swept over me, cold and assessing, his silent condemnation palpable. He recognized me. There was no doubt this time. The puzzle pieces had fallen into place. So, Alpha Thorne's voice rumbled, deep and guttural, resonating with controlled rage. The rogue, the killer of my daughter, you dared to seek refuge in an allied pack, and worse, you dared to claim my son. Each word was a lash, stinging, accusing. I met his gaze, my head held high, my wolf stirring, not in defiance, but in acceptance of my fate. Alpha Thorne, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my soul. I understand your anger, your grief. I admit to being the wolf who ended Arya's life, but it was not murder. It was a tragic accident born of desperate defense. Alpha Thorne let out a low snarl, a chilling sound. Accident? There is no accident when a life is taken. You trespassed. You attacked my pack. You spilled the blood of my kin. And then you fled like a coward. I fled to survive, Alpha Thorne, I retorted, a flash of my old warrior spirit asserting itself. My pack was broken, scattered. I was alone, wounded. I sought sanctuary, not to hide from justice, but to live. Riverbend offered me that chance. My gaze flickered to Rhys, hoping for a flicker of understanding, but his face remained a blank mask of pain and conflicted duty. And you deceived my son, Alpha Thorne continued, his voice rising, a tremor of pure fury entering his tone. You allowed him to claim you, to bind himself to the killer of his own flesh and blood. This is an insult to our pack, to our ancestors, to the very concept of the mate bond. Rhys finally spoke, his voice hoarse but firm. Father, the mate bond is true. It is ancient magic. Alpha Thorne rounded on him, his eyes blazing. The bond is a blessing, Rhys, not a shield for murderers. This cannot stand. Justice must be served. The killer of my daughter, no matter who she is, must pay the price. His gaze returned to me, cold and unforgiving. You will be judged, rogue, and you will pay with your life. My heart sank, the last sliver of hope flickering and dying. This was it. The Alpha's decree. Rhys, however, took a step forward, his golden eyes filled with a new, fierce determination. "No, Father," he stated, his voice resonating with a power that startled even Alpha Thorne. "She will not. Not like this. Not here." Alpha Thorne's head snapped around, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Rhys, are you defying me? Are you defending her? The one who extinguished your sister's life?" "I am upholding the laws of the mate bond, Father," Rhys declared, his voice unwavering, his gaze meeting his father's with equal intensity. "And the laws of my pack. She is my Luna, and I will not allow her to be executed without a fair trial. Not by you. Not by anyone." The mate bond, fractured and agonizing, suddenly surged with a powerful, undeniable force. A desperate cry for unity, for protection. Rhys was choosing me, not over his pack, not over his family, over a swift, biased execution. He was choosing justice, a complex, agonizing form of it, over pure vengeance. The revelation sent a tremor through me, a fragile spark of hope in the heart of despair. My fate was still uncertain. But I was not entirely alone, not yet. The battle for my life, and for the very meaning of our bond, had truly begun. Rhys's defiance hung heavy in the air, a daring challenge to his formidable father. Alpha Thorne, accustomed to unwavering obedience, stared at his son, his wolf form bristling with a mixture of shock and outrage. The tension in the den was palpable, a silent battle of wills between two powerful alphas. "A fair trial?" Alpha Thorne finally rumbled, his voice laced with incredulity. "Justice for Arya is clear." "Blood for blood!" "And what of the bond, Father?" Rhys countered, his voice steady, his golden eyes holding his father's gaze. "The moon goddess does not bind mates lightly. Lyra is my Luna, a part of my soul. Her life is inextricably linked to mine. To harm her is to harm me, to harm this pack." He placed a hand over his heart, conveying the agonizing truth of their connection. "We cannot dismiss such a sacred claim without proper process." Alpha Thorne's gaze flickered to me, then back to Rhys, a calculating glint in his eyes. He understood the implications of the mate bond. The primal magic that bound a true pair. To go against it, even in the name of justice, carried a profound risk, not just to Rhys, but to the harmony of his own pack, and to the sanctity of the laws governing all wolves. Was an ancient law, one rarely challenged but fiercely upheld. "Very well, Rhys," Alpha Thorne conceded, his voice grudging, the raw fury in his eyes slowly giving way to a cold, strategic resolve. "A trial it shall be, but it will be swift, and it will be overseen by representatives from both our packs. Her fate will be decided by the ancient laws, not by sentiment or a newly forged bond." His gaze hardened, fixing on me. "You will answer for your actions, rogue, and you will face the consequences." He then turned to Rhys, his voice regaining its authority. "We will convene at the sacred grove at dawn. You will present your case, and I will ensure that Arya's spirit finally finds peace." With a final, piercing look at me, Alpha Thorne turned and strode out of the den, his powerful form disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. The silence he left behind was almost as oppressive as his presence. Rhys and I stood alone, the mate bond still a fractured, painful thrum, but now infused with a fragile thread of determination. He had defended me, not just from Cale's immediate rage, but from his own father's judgment. He was upholding justice, not blindly defending my actions, but ensuring due process, a chance for my story to be heard. Rhys finally turned to me, his golden eyes clouded with an unspeakable sorrow. "A trial, Lyra. At dawn." His voice was low, heavy with the weight of the coming confrontation. "There will be no hiding now. Every detail will be laid bare." "I understand, Rhys," I replied, my voice steady. "And I will speak the truth, as I did to you. The burden of this secret it has been a torment." He nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He walked towards me, not touching me, but stopping just short, his gaze searching mine. I cannot promise anything, Lyra. My pack, my father, they will demand justice. Arya was loved. Her loss was a deep wound. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, as if in physical pain. "But I will ensure you are heard, and the Bondi it demands that I do everything in my power to protect you, even from myself." His voice was raw, revealing the profound internal conflict tearing him apart. The mate bond flared, a sudden, powerful surge of his tormented love, his desperate need to protect me, warring with his grief and his duty. It was overwhelming, tearing at the edges of my own control. "Thank you, Rhys," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "That's all I can ask." He didn't reply, simply turned and walked towards the entrance of the den. "Rest, Lyra," he commanded, his voice formal once more, the Alpha reasserting control over the conflicted mate. "Gather your strength. You will need it." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the den, the weight of the coming dawn pressing down on me, my fate hanging in the balance, resting entirely on the fragile thread of a mate bond and the complexities of ancient law. The stage was set, the characters gathered, and the final act of this impossible drama was about to unfold. The first hint of dawn, a faint blush on the eastern horizon, found us gathered at the sacred grove. This ancient clearing, usually reserved for pack celebrations and solemn rituals, was now transformed into a makeshift court. Representatives from both the Riverbend and Shadow Peak packs stood in hushed anticipation, their faces grim, their eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity, grief, and stern expectation. Alpha Thorne sat on a raised stone, his regal wolf form imposing, his gaze piercing. Beside him stood Cale, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. Opposite them, Rhys, in his human form, stood tall and resolute, though his eyes, golden and strained, revealed the immense internal struggle he waged. He looked at me for a fleeting moment, a complex mixture of agony and unwavering resolve in his gaze, before focusing on the assembly. I stood before them, in my human form, stripped of any insignia, my hands clasped tightly before me. The crisp morning air held a chill, but it was the icy dread in my stomach that truly cut through me. The mate bond with Rhys was a thin, agonizing wire, transmitting his pain and inner turmoil directly to my soul. Alpha Thorne began, his voice a low, guttural rumble that echoed through the grove. "We are gathered here today under the ancient laws, to seek justice for Arya, beloved daughter of the Shadow Peak Pack, whose life was unjustly taken. The accused stands before us, Luna Lyra, formerly a rogue, now mate to Alpha Rhys. Let the truth be spoken, and let the judgment of the ancestors guide us." He then nodded to Cale. Cale stepped forward, his eyes blazing with self-righteous fury. He recounted the incident years ago, the death of Arya, the disappearance of the rogue. He then described his recent tracking, my deliberate diversion, and my subsequent confession of misleading him. He painted a picture of a calculating killer, a deceitful outsider who had manipulated her way into Rhys's heart and Riverbend's trust. His words were sharp, accusatory, designed to inflame prejudice and condemn me. A collective murmur of outrage rippled through the Shadow Peak contingent. Even some of the Riverbend wolves looked at me with dawning suspicion, their loyalty torn. Then, Rhys stepped forward. He stood before the assembly, his gaze sweeping across both packs, his presence commanding. He did not defend my past actions, nor did he deny Cale's accusations of my confession. Instead, he presented his own account, his voice clear and resonant. Cale speaks the truth about Lyra's confession. She misled him. She did protect her old pack, and she did admit to being the one who took my sister's life. A collective gasp went through the assembly. Rhys paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. This truth has shattered me, as it would any brother. The pain of my sister's loss is raw and profound. I have grieved, and I continue to grieve for Arya. He then turned his gaze solely to Alpha Thorne, his voice gaining a new, fierce intensity. But I also heard Lyra's full account. Her pack was starving, cornered. Arya initiated the aggression, attacking a defenseless member of her pack. Lyra acted on instinct to protect her kin. It was a brutal conflict, a tragic consequence of territorial boundaries and desperate circumstances, not a malicious act of murder. Alpha Thorne scoffed, a dismissive wave of his paw. Excuses for blood spilled, Rhys. She killed my daughter. Rhys held up a hand, silencing his father with a quiet authority that surprised even me. And what of the mate bond, father? He demanded, his voice echoing through the grove. The bond that the moon goddess herself wove. Between us? Do we ignore the sacred laws for vengeance? He turned to the assembly, his voice rising, appealing to their deepest convictions. This bond is ancient. It is unbreakable. It speaks of a connection beyond our understanding, a destined path. If she were a true killer, stained with pure malice, would the goddess have allowed such a bond to form? Would it burn with such fierce, undeniable power? The mate bond, responding to his impassioned words, surged. A brilliant burst of warmth and undeniable connection that resonated not just between us, but outward, touching the hearts of the assembled wolves. It was a palpable force, a raw, undeniable truth. Many in the Riverbend pack, who had felt the mate bond's magic during the claiming, murmured in awe. Even some of the Shadow Peak wolves shifted uneasily, their strict adherence to law warring with the reverence for the sacred bond. The mate bond, Rhys continued, his voice softer now, yet filled with profound conviction, binds us completely. Her pain is mine, her fate mine. If you condemn her, you condemn a part of me. You tear at the very fabric of my being, of this pack's future. Justice, Father, must be tempered with wisdom. Vengeance will only breed further sorrow. We must find a path that honors Arya's memory, upholds the laws, and preserves the sanctity of the bond. He turned to me, his golden eyes filled with a desperate plea, a clear message communicated through the bond. Speak, Lyra. Convince them. This is your only chance. My heart swelled with a raw, agonizing love for him. He was fighting for me, risking everything, tearing himself apart between duty and bond. The responsibility to justify his faith in me was immense. I took a deep breath, stepping forward, my voice clear and strong despite the tremor in my hands. "Alpha Thorne," I began, my gaze sweeping over the assembled wolves. "I understand your pain. I offer no excuse for my actions, only context. I reacted to protect my kin, just as Arya reacted to protect hers. The tragedy of that night has haunted me every moment of my life. It drove me to seek sanctuary, to build a new life of service and loyalty to Riverbend." I paused, then continued, my voice imbued with an raw honesty that silenced even the most skeptical. I allowed myself to be claimed by Alpha Rhys, knowing the impossible secret I carried. It was a cowardice born of a desperate love, a profound fear of losing the only home, the only family I had found. I knew this day would come. I stand before you, accepting my fate. But I beg you, Alpha Thorne, and all assembled, temper your judgment with understanding. Consider the true nature of that night. Consider the power of the bond that binds me to your son. Let justice be served, yes, but let it be a justice that offers a path to healing, not simply to further destruction. I offer my life, my service, my unwavering loyalty to Riverbend as testament to my changed heart. Let the moon goddess bear witness to the truth of my soul. The sacred grove fell silent once more, the air thick with the weight of my plea, Rhys's impassioned defense, and the undeniable power of the mate bond. The choice lay with Alpha Thorne. Vengeance or wisdom? Destruction or a fragile path to an unimaginable future? My fate and the future of both packs hung precariously in the balance.